Her father lifted the belt again, and Eliza knew the next strike would land on her face. She tasted blood and smoke at the same time. Her hands were up, but they were shaking, and she hated that. The door creaked behind him, and cold air rushed in like a knife. A man stepped inside, huge in the frame, snow clinging to his shoulders. He did not shout. He only said, "Don't touch her again," like the words were law. Jed turned, eyes wild, and still swung the belt toward her. The stranger caught the leather in midair and stopped it dead. Eliza felt her knees go weak, not from fear, but from the terrible hope rising in her chest. Jed's mouth twisted into a drunken grin. The stranger leaned in, calm as stone, and Eliza heard him speak low enough that it felt meant for Jed's bones. "If you swing again, you won't live to regret it." And the room went so still she could hear the fire pop. Eliza waited for her father to explode. She waited for the stranger to fail. She waited for the world to prove it always chose Jed. Instead, Jed hesitated, and Eliza realized she had one chance in her whole life to step out of the corner. The only question was simple and brutal. Would she take it, or would she let fear drag her back down? That morning, Eliza left the shack while Jed slept in his chair. The bottle lay empty by his boot. Her back burned under her dress where the welts had risen. She moved quiet, like she always did, because noise was an invitation. Outside, the mining town sat under a fresh skin of snow, roofs bowed, streets buried. Folks called it Elk Hollow, but in winter, it felt like a graveyard that still breathed. Eliza kept her head down and walked to the general store, shawl pulled tight, hands tucked under her arms to keep her fingers alive. Warm air hit her face when she stepped inside. Hiram Cutter looked up from his ledger, kind eyes that never stayed kind long enough to act. His gaze flicked to her bruised cheek and then away. "Morning, Eliza," he said, like the word morning meant something good. Eliza swallowed and forced her voice steady. "I need work," she said. Sweeping, stacking, anything. And she hated how small it sounded. Cutter sighed, the sigh of a man who wanted to help and still would not. "Your PA owes me already," he said. "I can't add more credit." And Eliza felt hunger tighten in her stomach like a fist. She turned to leave, and Cutter stopped her with a quiet, guilty motion. He set a small paper bag on the counter. "Salt pork," he said. "A pound," and he did not meet her eyes. Eliza stared at it. Charity tasted bitter, but she took it anyway. Cutter leaned forward, voice low. "There's a stranger in town," he warned. "Came in during the blizzard," and Eliza felt cold move through her blood. "He's been asking questions," Cutter added, "about who lives where," and then he said the part that mattered. He asked about Jed, and Eliza understood why the warmth in the store suddenly felt thin. Eliza stepped back outside, bag clutched to her chest. Halfway home, she saw the stranger standing in the street like the snow belonged to him. Tall, broad, fur on his shoulders, dark beard, gray eyes that did not flinch from her bruises. He looked at her like he had been waiting. "You're Jed Harlan's girl," he said. Eliza stopped, keeping distance. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice held, even if her hands did not. "My name is Silas Crowe," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "I have business with your father." And he said it like the world had already decided. Eliza tightened her grip on the bag. "Half this town has business with him," she said, and the words slipped out before she could bite them back. A flicker crossed Silas's face, almost like respect. He stepped aside and let her pass. "Lock your door," he said. Eliza kept walking, heart pounding. "Why?" she asked without turning. Silas answered, "Because what comes next is loud," and his boots started crunching toward her shack. Inside, Jed still slept in his chair. Eliza hid the salt pork behind a tin, because even food could start a beating. She stared at her father and felt nothing soft for him. Only the old fear, and beneath it a newer, darker anger. A heavy step sounded on the porch. then another. The latch rattled once. Eliza backed toward the corner, hands empty, because there was nothing in that shack she could use as a weapon. The door slammed inward, and snow blew across the floorboards. Silas filled the doorway, blocking the wind. Jed jolted awake, reaching for the rifle above the hearth. Silas moved first. One hand grabbed the barrel, ripped it down, and tossed it into the corner like it weighed nothing. Jed sprang up, face red with rage. "Get out!" he shouted, and the words cracked on whiskey. Silas shut the door with a quiet click, and that quiet felt worse than the slam. Silas faced Jed like a man staring at a wound he had carried for years. "You robbed my father on a cattle drive," Silas said. "You left him broken," and Jed's eyes darted like a trapped animal. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jed snapped, but his voice lacked its usual bite. Silas took one slow step closer. "I came here to end you," he said, still calm, still low. Eliza's breath caught, because she had never heard anyone speak to Jed like that and stay standing. Jed forced a laugh and lifted his chin. "You ain't got the nerve," he said, trying to sound big in a small room. Silas did not answer that. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, then set it on the table. It clinked heavy. Jed's eyes dropped to it, greedy by habit. "300 in gold," Silas said. "Not for you," and Jed blinked, confused. Silas turned his head and looked straight at Eliza in the corner. "It is for her," he said. Eliza's stomach flipped. Jed snapped his gaze toward her, and she felt the old chain tighten around her throat. "That girl ain't going nowhere," Jed growled. Silas's eyes did not leave Eliza. "Come with me," he said. "Up in the mountains I have a cabin, food, warmth," and the words sounded like a story meant for other women. Eliza tried to speak, but shame burned in her mouth. Silas softened his tone, just a little. "I saw you last night," he said. I saw what he did, and Eliza wanted to disappear, but her feet stayed planted. Jed stepped toward her, anger waking fully now. "You don't get to take what's mine," he hissed, and his hand went to the belt hanging loose at his waist. Silas shifted 1 inch, placing himself between Jed and Eliza without drama. "Don't," Silas said, quiet as a prayer, and Jed froze like the word hit him in the chest. Eliza stared at the gold pouch. Then she stared at the open space beside Silas, the thin line between captive and free. Outside, the blizzard pressed against the walls like it wanted in. Silas held out his hand toward her, not rushing, not begging. "Choose," he said, and Eliza realized the hardest part was not leaving. The hardest part was believing she deserved to. Silas helped her onto the horse like she might break. Eliza hated that feeling, even though her legs were shaking. He swung up behind her, solid and steady, and took the reins without crowding her. The town was still half asleep, but smoke already curled from a few chimneys. Snow creaked under the hooves, loud in the quiet street. Eliza kept waiting to hear her father shout her name. She kept waiting to feel a hand yank her backward. Nothing came, only the wind and the hard rhythm of the horse moving. They cleared the last buildings of Elk Hollow and climbed toward the foothills. The air grew sharper with every step. Eliza pulled Silas's fur tighter around her shoulders, hating how warm it felt. Warm meant safe, and safe felt like a trick. Silas did not speak for a long stretch, which somehow made him more frightening. Men who talked too much always wanted something. Men who stayed quiet usually already knew what they would take. Eliza glanced back once, quick as a blink, and saw his gray eyes watching the trail behind them. "You can jump if you need to," she said, voice flat. Silas did not laugh. He only nodded once. "Fair," he said, "but you will not need to." Eliza wanted to tell him he did not get to decide that. Instead, she watched the trees thin and the slope steepen. Her fingers started to numb under the fur. She thought of the gold pouch on the table, sitting in her father's shack like a curse. She thought of Jed waking and finding the door hanging wrong. The anger would come first. Then the fear. then the hunt. Jed Harlan did not love her, but he hated losing what he could control. Control was the only thing he had left. They reached a narrow creek cutting through the snow, black water moving like it was alive. Silas slowed the horse and let it drink. Eliza slid down, her boots sinking deep, cold biting through the leather. Silas handed her a canteen without asking. She drank because her throat was dry and she did not want to look weak. The water hurt her teeth. She lowered the canteen and stared at the mountains ahead, pale shapes under a bruised sky. "How far is your cabin?" she asked. 4 hours, Silas said. "Maybe less if the pass stays open." Eliza looked at his hands, scarred, strong, not soft hands, but careful hands. It bothered her more than roughness would have. Rough men were easy to read. Careful men could hide knives behind kindness. Silas watched her watch him, and his voice stayed even. "You want to know why?" he said. Eliza did not answer. Silas nodded again, like her silence was enough. "Because I came here to kill him," he said, "and then I saw you." And his jaw tightened the smallest amount. Killing him would have been easy. Leaving you there would have been worse. And he turned away to check the saddle cinch like his own words stung. Eliza felt heat rise in her face, shame sharp and sour. "So I am your excuse," she said, "your reason to feel better." And she expected him to deny it. Silas did not deny it. He looked at her, gray eyes steady. "You are not my excuse," he said. "You are the line I will not cross." And the sentence landed heavy, like a promise he did not hand out often. Eliza did not know what to do with that. Her life had been full of threats, not promises. Promises felt dangerous because they could be taken away. The horse lifted its head, ears forward. Silas went still. Eliza heard it a second later, hoofbeats, fast and uneven, coming up the trail. Silas moved her behind a boulder with one quiet motion. He did not shove. He guided, firm and controlled, like he had done this before. Eliza crouched low, breath caught in her ribs, and peered around the rock. 3 riders appeared through the trees, miners by their clothes, pistols on hips, faces raw from cold and drink. The one in front had a scar along his cheek, pale against wind-burned skin. He pulled his horse to a stop and smiled like he owned the mountain. "There you are," he called. "Thought you might freeze before we caught you." And his eyes swept the clearing like he expected the girl to be tied behind the saddle. Silas stayed in the open. No flinching, no pleading. "Turn around," he said. The scarred man laughed. "We are just here for the girl," he said. Jed Harlan offered 50 for her, and Eliza felt her stomach drop because she had been right. Jed had woken up hungry for control. "Hand her over and ride away," the miner added. "Easy money for us, easy life for you." And he said it like Eliza was a sack of flour. Silas's voice stayed low. "You do not know what you are stepping into," he said. The miner raised his pistol. The 2 behind him did the same. "We know enough," he said. "One man cannot fight 3. And Eliza pressed her forehead to the cold rock and waited for the moment everything went wrong. Silas moved so fast it barely made sense. He struck the lead man's wrist with the rifle stock, hard and clean. The pistol flew into the snow. Silas fired twice, sharp cracks swallowed by the trees. One rider pitched sideways. Another slid from his saddle with a grunt, clutching his shoulder. The scarred man scrambled for his fallen gun, panic showing through his grin. Silas grabbed him by the collar and hauled him close, boots dragging in the snow. "Who sent you?" Silas asked. "Nobody," the miner gasped. "We heard the offer," and his eyes flicked toward the trees like he wanted to run without being seen running. Silas shook him once, not cruel, just final. "Jed sent you," he said. The miner nodded fast. "He came to the saloon," he blurted, "waving gold, yelling that you stole his girl." And Eliza heard it clear, her father's voice using lies like rope. "He said bring her back or he will burn down the store that fed her," the miner added. And Eliza's throat tightened because of Mr. Cutter. Jed was reaching for anything to pull her back. Silas lowered his face close to the miner's. "Go home," he said. "Tell Jed this mountain is mine," and his tone did not rise at all. "Tell him if he sends men again, I will come down and end the thing he started." And the miner's eyes went wide because he believed him. Silas let him drop into the snow. The miner scrambled onto his horse and fled, leaving the wounded men groaning behind. Eliza came out from behind the boulder on shaking legs. She stared at the two men in the snow, blood bright against white. She waited for sickness. She waited for guilt. What came was a quiet, hard calm. They had been going to drag her back. They had been going to laugh while they did it. Silas watched her face, reading something she did not want him to see. "Does it bother you?" he asked. Eliza swallowed. "It bothers me that it had to happen," she said. "It does not bother me that I am not going back," and her voice surprised her by staying steady. Silas nodded once. Not praise, not pity, just a grim acceptance. He lifted her back onto the horse, then climbed up behind her. His warmth blocked the worst of the wind. They rode harder after that, climbing into higher snow, the trail narrowing between boulders. Eliza's body ached, but her mind would not stop. Jed would not stop. The town would not protect her. The mountain might. Hours later, the cabin appeared through blowing white, a squat shape built of heavy logs, smoke curling from the chimney like a sign that life still lived there. Silas dismounted and lifted Eliza down when her legs refused to cooperate. He carried her across the threshold without asking, like he did not trust her balance. Heat struck her face. The smell of wood smoke and coffee and pine wrapped around her. Eliza blinked hard, because warmth hit her chest like grief. Silas set her in a chair by the fire. He knelt, pulled off her boots, and rubbed her feet between his hands. It hurt, sharp as needles, and she bit her lip to keep quiet. Silas did not look up. "Good," he murmured. "Pain means you are still here," and Eliza hated that it sounded true. He draped a thick wool blanket over her shoulders. She stared at the shelves, at the neat tools, at the order of a man who lived alone. It looked like a place where rules mattered. Silas stood and faced her. "The bedroom is yours," he said. "I sleep here." And he pointed to the space near the fire. Eliza tightened her jaw. "I can sleep anywhere," she said, because pride was all she had left. Silas's gaze held steady. "You will sleep in a bed," he replied. "Not because you asked. Because I said so." And the firmness in it did not feel like Jed. It felt like safety with edges. Eliza opened her mouth to argue. Then the door rattled once under a gust, and she realized how alone she would have been without him. She pulled the blanket tighter and stared into the fire. Outside, the wind rose again, eager and hungry. Somewhere down the mountain, her father would be drinking and plotting. Eliza felt warmth on her skin for the first time in her life, and the fear did not leave. It only changed shape. She finally understood the truth that made her hands shake. Getting away was not the end. It was the beginning. The first night, Eliza did not sleep in the bed. She lay on top of the covers, boots off, blanket pulled to her chin, eyes wide in the dark. The cabin creaked as the wind leaned on it. The fire cracked low in the main room. Every sound made her body tighten, because her body still believed pain was always one step away. She kept listening for Silas to move. When he did, it was only to add a log to the fire. He did it quiet, like he did not want to frighten her. Near dawn, Eliza heard him cough once, rough and tired. She pushed the bedroom door open a hand's width and looked out. Silas sat in a chair by the fire with his elbows on his knees. His head was bowed. A thin band of gold sat in his palm, catching the firelight. He turned it slow, like the motion was the only thing holding him together. Eliza felt a strange pull in her chest. She did not know this man, but she recognized that kind of hurt. It was the same kind her father wore, only Silas kept it from spilling onto others. She started to close the door again. Silas spoke without looking up. "Go back to bed." Eliza stayed in the doorway, "I cannot sleep," she said. Her voice sounded small in the warm room. Silas let out a slow breath. "Then sit by the fire," he replied, still not looking at her, like meeting her eyes might cost him something. Eliza walked out, careful with her sore ribs, and lowered herself into the chair across from him. The fire warmed her face. The rest of her still felt cold. Silence settled between them, thick but not sharp. Eliza watched the ring in his hand. She did not want to ask. She also did not want to pretend she had not seen. "Your wife," she said. Silas's fingers tightened around the ring. For a moment his jaw worked like he might snap at her. Instead, his shoulders sank the smallest amount. "Yes," he said. Eliza stared at the flames. "You do not have to tell me," she added, because she meant it. Silas lifted his eyes at last. His gaze was tired, not angry. "If I do not tell you, you will make your own story," he said. "Most people do," and he rubbed his thumb over the ring like it burned. "Her name was Mary," he went on. "Our little girl was Lottie," and his voice went rough on the second name. Eliza's throat tightened. She made herself breathe. "What happened?" she asked. Silas looked past her, out toward the window where the storm pressed against the glass. "Fever," he said, fast and mean, and his face went still like stone. "I had training, books, tools, pride," he continued. "I still could not stop it." And he swallowed hard, the first crack in him she had seen. "I buried them in the spring ground when the thaw finally came," he finished, and the cabin felt colder for a second. Eliza wanted to say she was sorry. Sorry felt weak in her mouth. Instead, she said the only honest thing she had. "That is not your fault." Silas gave a small, humorless breath that was not quite a laugh. "I know what my hands did and did not do," he answered. "Knowing does not erase it," and he closed his fist around the ring. He stared at it for a long time, then set it on the mantel, like placing it down might lighten him. The fire popped. Neither of them spoke. Eliza felt her own heart beating, steady and strange. After that, Silas gave her rules like a man building a fence around something fragile. He showed her where the water was stored. He showed her where the flour and salt sat in tin canisters. He showed her the trapline map, and the rifle rack and the small drawer with a pistol wrapped in cloth. "You do not touch that unless you mean it," he said, and Eliza nodded. He pointed to the bedroom door. "That is your space," he told her. "I do not enter," and he said it like it mattered to him as much as it would to her. Eliza did not thank him. She just breathed easier. 2 days passed with the storm trapped outside like an animal. Silas chopped wood, checked the roofline, melted snow for water. Eliza cleaned because she did not know how to sit still. She swept floors that were already clean. She wiped shelves that did not need wiping. Work kept her hands busy and her mind from slipping back into old fear. Silas watched her once, then turned away like he understood. He did not tell her to rest. He let her move. On the third morning, Eliza woke to the smell of coffee strong enough to make her eyes water. She stepped into the main room and saw Silas at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair still damp from snowmelt. He slid a tin cup toward her without looking up. "Drink," he said. Eliza took it. The coffee was bitter and hot and real. She held the cup with both hands and let the warmth sink into her fingers. "I have never had coffee like this," she admitted. Silas's mouth twitched like the smallest smile tried to happen. "Town coffee is mud," he said. "This is honest," and he set a pan on the stove. The smell of salt pork hit the air. Eliza's stomach clenched with hunger so hard she almost hated him for feeding her. She ate slow because her body was not used to enough. Silas ate even slower, watching her like he was making sure she kept it down. It should have made her angry. Instead, it made her feel seen in a way that scared her. When she finished, she pushed the plate away. Silence sat between them again, but it did not feel like punishment. "Why did you really come to El Colo?" Eliza asked. Silas did not pretend he did not hear. He rinsed the pan, then set it aside. "My father limped the rest of his life because of Jed Harlan," he said. "He died bitter and poor," and his eyes went hard for a moment. I followed Jed for years, he admitted. Every trail, every rumor, and he looked at Eliza like he wanted her to understand the weight of it. I wanted him to suffer like my father suffered, he added. Eliza's hands tightened around the cup. And now? She asked. Silas's gaze dropped to her bruises, then lifted again. Now I want you to live, he said, and the words landed heavier than any promise she had ever heard. That afternoon, the sky cleared too bright, the kind of bright that came with deep cold. Silas went outside to check the traps near the ridge. Eliza stayed inside, pretending she was calm. She washed dishes. She folded blankets. She found herself drawn to the shelf of books. Though the words looked like a foreign language, she touched the spines like they were relics from a world she had never been allowed into. A thin journal sat tucked behind a medical book. Eliza stared at it, then pulled her hand back. She did not open it. Not because she was not curious, because she understood what privacy meant now, and she refused to be the kind of person Jed had made her. Near dusk, a sound snapped her head up. A knock, not wind, not a branch. A knock with a human rhythm. Eliza froze, every muscle locking. Silas was outside. The rifle rack looked far away. The pistol drawer felt even farther. She moved anyway, step by careful step, and pulled the pistol free. Her hands did not shake as much as she expected. She went to the window and lifted the edge of the curtain. A man stood on the porch, hunched against the cold, scar along his cheek. Eliza's blood chilled. It was the miner who had fled. He knocked again, softer this time, like he knew what he deserved. "Miss," he called, "I am not here to take you," and his voice sounded thin with fear. "I need to talk," he added. Eliza did not open the door. She spoke through the wood. "Say it from there," she demanded. The man swallowed hard. "Jed is not sending drunks now," he said. He went to the preacher and the sheriff, and Eliza's stomach dropped. "He is telling them you were stolen," the miner continued. "He is saying the mountain man is a killer," and his eyes flicked toward the trees like he expected Silas to appear and end him. Eliza pressed her forehead to the door for one silent beat. Then she forced herself steady. "Why are you warning me?" she asked. The man's mouth worked. "Because I saw your face in town," he said. "And I saw his face when he realized he lost you," and he shook his head. "That is not love," he added. "That is a man hunting his property." And he looked down like the word property made him sick. "They are forming a posse at first light," he finished. "Sheriff, 2 deputies, and men who want your father's gold." And the last part came out like a confession. Eliza's grip tightened on the pistol. "How many?" she asked. 6, the miner said. "Maybe more by morning," and his voice cracked. "And Jed said if he cannot take you back, he will burn this cabin down with you inside," he added, and the threat felt so real Eliza could smell smoke already. A crunch of snow sounded behind the miner. Silas stepped into view, rifle in hand, eyes like winter steel. The miner flinched and raised both hands. Silas did not lift the rifle. He only stared. Eliza opened the door a hand's width, pistol low at her side. Silas glanced at the gun, then back to her face, and she saw it in his eyes. He did not look surprised she was armed. He looked proud. "What did he say?" Silas asked the miner. The miner licked his lips. "Posse at dawn," he repeated. "Jed wants the girl back," and he swallowed. "He wants you dead," he added. Silas's voice stayed quiet. "Go," he told the miner. "Do not ride with them." And the miner did not need to be told twice. He fled down the porch steps and vanished into the trees. Eliza stood in the doorway, cold air spilling in around her ankles. "He is coming," she said, and her voice held. Silas walked up to her and shut the door behind them. The cabin felt suddenly smaller. He set the rifle on the table and looked at her like he was making a decision that hurt. "Then we stop running," he said. Eliza's mouth went dry. "How?" she asked. Silas stepped closer, close enough that she could smell pine and smoke on him. His voice dropped, steady and final. "Tonight you learn to shoot," he said. "And if Jed steps over this threshold, I will end him." and his eyes locked onto hers like a vow. Eliza felt fear rise, then something else beneath it, something sharp and alive. She nodded once. "Teach me," she said. Outside, the wind began to climb again, as if the mountain itself was gathering breath. Silas started with the rifle because he said a pistol was for panic and a rifle was for choices. He set a tin cup on a stump 20 paces from the cabin and made Eliza stand with her feet planted in the snow. Her hands were stiff from cold, but he did not let her complain. He placed the rifle against her shoulder and adjusted her grip like he was fitting a tool to her body. "Breathe low," he said. "Do not fight the shake. Let it pass." And his voice stayed calm, like calm was something you could learn. Eliza sighted down the barrel and saw the tin cup wobble in the wind. Her finger hovered near the trigger and her stomach nodded. Silas leaned close and spoke near her ear. "You are not a child in that shack anymore," he said. "You are a woman with a choice." The first shot went wide and buried itself in snow. Eliza flinched at the sound and hated herself for it. Silas did not scold her. He only nodded and moved the tin cup closer. "Again," he said, and the word held no anger, only patience. Eliza fired a second time, and the cup jumped with a sharp metallic ring. Her breath caught. It was a small hit, but it felt like a door opening. Silas raised his eyebrows like he had expected it all along. "Good," he said. "Now you learn the harder part." And he pointed to her chest. "You learn not to freeze when fear crawls in," and Eliza swallowed hard because she knew that fear well. By late afternoon, her shoulder ached from recoil and her fingers burned from cold. Silas made her practice loading and unloading until her hands moved without thought. He had her fire from standing, then from kneeling, then from behind the edge of a boulder. Every time she missed, he said nothing sharp. Every time she hit, he did not praise like a teacher. He simply nodded like survival was not something to cheer, only something to respect. Eliza kept glancing toward the tree line, expecting to see men moving between trunks. The mountains stayed quiet, which made it worse. Quiet was where Jed liked to hide his worst. When the sun began to sink, Silas finally lowered the rifle. "That is enough for today," he said, and Eliza realized her hands were no longer shaking from weakness. They were shaking from a new kind of power she did not yet trust. Inside, Silas barred the door with a heavy beam and checked the shutters twice. He moved around the cabin with steady purpose, laying out blankets near the back wall and shifting the table so it blocked part of the doorway. Eliza watched him, chest tight, because the way he prepared looked like memory, not guesswork. He knew what it meant to be hunted. She thought of her father saying she was soft. She thought of her father being afraid for the first time. The thought should have made her feel cruel. It made her feel clean. Silas set a lantern on the floor and turned the wick low. "Light as a target," he said. "We do not invite eyes." And Eliza nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. He made stew with beans and the last of the salt pork. The smell filled the cabin like comfort, and it nearly broke her because comfort felt unreal. Eliza ate slow, forcing herself not to hoard each bite. Silas ate even slower, watching the windows between mouthfuls. When she finished, she set the bowl down and rubbed her bruised ribs without thinking. Silas saw it, and his jaw tightened, but he did not ask what Jed had done that morning. He already knew enough. He poured her a tin cup of coffee, strong and dark, then sat across from her. "Listen to me," he said. "If they come, you stay behind me unless I tell you otherwise." And his tone was firm without being sharp. Eliza felt the old reflex rise, the urge to obey to avoid pain. She pushed it down. "I will not hide in a corner again," she said, and her voice surprised her by staying steady. Silas studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then you do what I tell you, not what fear tells you," he replied. He reached under the bed and pulled out a small metal box. Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth and a thin stack of letters. Eliza looked at him, confused. Silas's eyes went distant for a second, like he was looking at a different life. "If I die," he said, and Eliza's stomach turned. "You take these and you ride east to the town of Redgate. You find Judge Hollis," he continued. You give him the letters and you tell him Jed Harlan robbed Thomas Crowe on the Harmon Drive, and his voice hardened on his father's name. Eliza stared at the box like it was a weight. I am not riding anywhere without you, she said. Silas's gaze held hers. You will if you have to, he answered, and she hated that she believed him. Night came fast in the mountains. The wind pressed against the logs and made the cabin groan like it was alive. Eliza sat by the fire with the rifle across her lap and the pistol tucked at her waist. Silas paced in slow circles, stopping every few minutes to listen. The silence between gusts felt too clean, like someone had wiped the world down for violence. Eliza's mind kept replaying Jed's hands at her throat from years of near misses. She rubbed her palm against her skirt to keep it dry. Silas stopped beside her chair and placed his hand on her shoulder for one brief moment. The touch was gentle, but it anchored her. You are doing fine, he said, and Eliza's throat tightened because nobody had ever said that to her without wanting something back. Hours passed. The fire sank lower, and Silas fed it with small pieces so the light stayed low. Eliza fought the urge to drift into that gray, numb place she used to hide in. She forced her eyes to track the shadows near the door. Then she heard it, faint at first, a crunch that did not match wind or branch. Silas went still, head turning toward the porch. Another crunch followed, then a pause, then two more, careful and spaced. Someone was trying to move quiet in deep snow. Eliza's heart slammed once, hard enough to make her dizzy. Silas held up a hand, palm down, telling her to stay. He moved toward the window and lifted the corner of the shutter with 2 fingers. A lantern glow bobbed outside, low and covered, like men trying to hide light behind coats. Eliza caught the shape of hats and shoulders in the storm dark. 6, maybe more, spread out in a half circle, careful around the cabin like wolves around a trapped deer. Then a voice rose, thin with cold and thick with rage. Jed's voice. Eliza, he called, and the name scraped across her skin. Open up and come out, he shouted. You do it peaceful, and I do not have to get mean. And Eliza nearly laughed because there was no mean left for him to reach. Silas stepped away from the window and looked at her. His gray eyes asked a question without words. Do you want to face him? Eliza stood slowly, rifle steady against her shoulder. She walked to the door and pressed her palm to the wood. For one silent beat, she felt her old life behind that door, cold and filthy and small. Then she turned and met Silas's gaze. He does not get my fear anymore, she said. Silas nodded once, then shifted to the side of the doorway, rifle ready, body angled like a shield. Eliza unbarred the door just enough to speak through the crack. Go home, P.A., she called, and her voice carried. You do not own me, and her words hung in the dark like a thrown stone. A harsh laugh came from outside. You think you are brave now? Jed yelled. You think that mountain brute made you a woman. And Eliza felt heat rise in her face, but she did not flinch. Jed's voice dropped, sly and poisonous. Come out, Eliza. I will forgive you. I will even stop drinking, he lied. And Eliza's stomach knotted, because the lie sounded like every trap he had ever set. Silas shifted closer, a warning presence at her side. Eliza kept her voice steady. You never wanted a daughter, she said. You wanted someone to hurt. And silence answered her for half a breath. Then the first bottle smashed against the cabin wall. Glass exploded and sprayed snow. Another hit the porch rail and burst into flame, oil catching fast in the dry wood. Eliza's breath stopped. Jed was not just talking. He was trying to burn the place that had given her warmth. Silas cursed low under his breath and shoved the door closed. He threw the beam back in place and grabbed a bucket. Fire first, he said, voice sharp now, and Eliza moved with him, hands grabbing snow, packing it onto the flame through a crack in the door. Smoke curled under the frame. Outside, men shouted, boots scuffing on the porch. Someone slammed a shoulder against the door once, testing it. Silas turned to Eliza, face hard and focused. If they break in, you shoot the first man through the gap, he said. Do not aim for the gun, aim for the center. And Eliza's mouth went dry. She nodded anyway. The cabin shook again as another shoulder hit the door. The beam groaned. Eliza raised the rifle and lined the sights on the thin strip of space where wood met frame. Her finger settled on the trigger. She heard Jed's voice closer now, right outside, full of hate. "Open it," he snarled, and the sound made Eliza's bones remember. Silas leaned near her ear, voice low, the same voice from the shack. "Don't touch her again," he said, not to Jed, but to the whole world. The beam creaked a final time, and the door began to give. The beam snapped with a sound like a bone breaking. The door lurched inward a hand's width, then another, held only by Silas's shoulder braced against it. Smoke pushed through the crack, stinging Eliza's eyes. She held the rifle steady anyway, because if she let the barrel dip, fear would take it. A boot kicked from outside. The latch tore. The door flew open and cold rushed in, carrying snow and the stink of kerosene. A man pushed through first, hat pulled low, pistol in hand. Eliza saw him for half a breath, nothing more than shape and intent. She remembered Silas's words, not the center of the gun, the center of the man. She fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder and pain flashed hot. The man jerked backward and fell off the porch with a cry that cut short in the snow. Eliza's breath came fast, but her hands stayed on the rifle. She did not scream. She did not freeze. She felt a hard, quiet part of her wake up. Silas surged forward into the doorway before the next man could squeeze in. He struck with the rifle stock, a brutal, clean blow, and a second man went down, clutching his face. Another bottle flew from the dark and shattered near the hearth, flames licking along the floorboards. Silas kicked snow onto it and shoved the door half closed. For a moment the chaos narrowed to sound and movement. Boots on porch, men shouting, the fire crackling hungry. Then Jed's voice rose above the rest, sharp with rage and panic. "She shot him," Jed yelled, and Eliza felt a sick, strange satisfaction. He wanted her helpless. He wanted her weak. He got a different girl. Jed's boots thudded onto the porch. Eliza saw his silhouette through the crack. Broad shoulders, hat crooked, pistol raised. He was not drunk enough to stumble now. He was drunk enough to be brave. Silas held the rifle in one hand and reached for the lantern with the other, then stopped. His eyes flicked to Eliza. He was thinking, planning, the way a man planned when he had seen worse than this. "Back room," he said, voice low. "Now." And Eliza moved, stepping over the table, heart pounding. She hated stepping back, but she understood. A corner was a trap. A back room was a position. They retreated into the bedroom, the one Silas had given her without asking. He shoved the door nearly closed but left a gap. He set the rifle in Eliza's hands and pulled the pistol from her waist. "You take the long sight," he said. "I take close," and Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she could do both, but she saw his eyes. This was not about pride. It was about keeping her alive. The cabin shook as the door was hit again. A man grunted outside. Another shouted, "Burn it!" Jed barked orders like he was sheriff of hell. Silas leaned close to Eliza, voice steady. "If I go down, you run out the back window and you ride hard," he said. "You do not wait." And Eliza's stomach turned. "I am not leaving you," she whispered. Silas's gaze held hers, and for one silent beat the noise outside faded. "Then do not make me carry you," he said, and there was a hint of something almost gentle in it. Then it was gone. He turned back toward the main room and crouched near the doorway like a mountain cat. Another crash. The front door splintered wider. A man shoved in, then another. Eliza saw shadows moving in the cabin, shapes in smoke. She aimed through the gap and waited for a clear line. Silas struck fast, the pistol firing once, sharp and close. A man screamed and fell, crawling back toward the door. Another man fired into the room and the bullet slammed into the wall above Eliza's head, wood dust raining down. Eliza did not duck. She did not move. She breathed low like Silas told her and kept the rifle steady. Then Jed stepped inside. Eliza knew his walk. She knew his smell, even through smoke. Whiskey and sweat and old hate. His eyes found her through the bedroom gap, and his mouth twisted into a grin that was not joy. It was ownership. "There you are," he said, and his voice went soft, the voice he used right before he hurt her. "Hiding behind a man." And the words tried to pull her back into the corner of her childhood. Silas rose into view between Jed and Eliza. He did not lift his voice. He did not curse. "Leave," he said, and the words sounded like a door closing. Jed's gaze slid over Silas, sizing him up. Jed tried to laugh. "You think you can keep her," he sneered. "She is mine." And Eliza felt her stomach knot with disgust. A man behind Jed muttered, "Jed, we got enough already." But Jed ignored him. He kept his pistol trained, not on Silas, but toward the bedroom, toward Eliza. "Step aside," Jed told Silas. "This is family business." And he said it like family meant bruises and belts and blame. Silas did not step aside. His eyes went cold. "Family does not do what you did," Silas replied. "Family does not starve a girl and call it grief." And Jed's face tightened like the truth hit him too clean. Jed lifted his pistol higher. "I will put a hole in you," he said, and his voice shook just a little. Fear, hiding under rage. Eliza saw it and understood something new. Jed had always needed her because she was smaller. A man like Silas made him feel what he really was. Silas's voice dropped, quiet enough that Eliza had to lean to hear. "Put the gun down," he said, and Jed's hand trembled. Jed's eyes flicked toward the back window, toward Eliza's escape, toward the life he was losing. He snarled and lunged, not at Silas, but toward the bedroom door. Eliza's breath stopped. She lifted the rifle to fire, but Silas moved first. He slammed into Jed's side, driving him into the table. The pistol went off with a deafening crack, blowing a chunk of wood from the wall. Eliza flinched at the sound but kept her grip. Silas and Jed grappled, bodies twisting in smoke and firelight. Jed was mean and desperate. Silas was controlled and relentless. Jed's elbow caught Silas in the ribs. Silas grunted, but he did not loosen his hold. Jed shoved free and swung the pistol like a club. It smashed into Silas's cheek. Blood sprayed dark. Eliza's throat tightened. She stepped forward, rifle raised, but there was no clean shot. She could hit Silas. She could hit the wall. She could hit nothing. Jed saw her hesitation and grinned, teeth bared. "See," he hissed, "she cannot do it." And he threw himself toward her. Eliza's body moved before her mind did. She yanked the rifle up, not to shoot, but to block. Jed crashed into her, and they fell into the snow that had been tracked inside. The rifle slipped from her hands. Jed's weight pinned her. His hands went to her throat, just like he had done 100 times in smaller ways. His fingers squeezed and the world narrowed. Eliza clawed at his wrists, but he was stronger. He leaned close, breath hot, eyes wild. "You will come home," he whispered. "You will learn respect." And her vision blurred at the edges. Eliza's fingers scraped through snow and ash. They found something hard, the broken leg of the chair. She grabbed it, swung with all the strength she had saved up across 19 years, and slammed it into Jed's temple. The blow landed solid. Jed grunted, and his grip loosened for half a breath. It was enough. Eliza shoved him off, rolling onto her side, gasping air like it was new. Silas was there in an instant, rising behind Jed like a storm. He grabbed Jed by the collar and lifted him off the ground. Jed's boots kicked, useless. Silas's face was split with blood, but his eyes were steady. "Don't touch her again," he said, and this time it was not a warning. It was a verdict. Silas slammed Jed into the wall once. Jed's head hit wood with a dull sound. He sagged, still breathing, but his fight drained out like a punctured skin. Silas dropped him into the snow. Jed coughed and tried to crawl. Silas stepped forward, boot planted beside Jed's hand. Outside, one of the posse men shouted, "Jed!" and another yelled, "We are leaving!" fear turning their voices thin. Boots pounded off the porch. A horse screamed and bolted. The men who still could run, chose to run. They did not want Silas Crowe's wrath. They did not want the mountain to remember their names. Eliza sat up, throat burning, lungs dragging air in harsh pulls. Her hands shook now, not from weakness but from what she had almost lost. She looked at Jed in the snow, face turned sideways, eyes glassy, blood seeping from his scalp. The sight did not make her sad. It made her tired. She rose slowly, leaning against the table for balance. Silas turned to her, chest heaving, and for a moment the hard shell in his eyes cracked. Fear for her, raw and real. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Eliza touched her throat and winced. "I am here," she said, and it was the first time she had ever answered a man without apology. She looked at Jed again. He was trying to speak, lips trembling. "Eliza," he rasped, like the name was still his rope. Silas glanced down at him, jaw tight. "We can end this," Silas said quietly, and Eliza knew he meant it. He had come to kill Jed once. He could do it now and call it justice. The choice hovered in the warm, smoky air. Eliza stepped closer to her father and crouched, not to comfort him but to look him in the eyes. Jed's gaze flickered toward her like a drowning man seeing shore. "You cannot leave me," he whispered. "You are all I got left of her." And the words tried to summon her mother like a weapon. Eliza felt something shift inside her, not softness, but clarity. She stood and faced Silas. "No," she said, and her voice did not shake. "He does not get that from us," and her words surprised even her. "He does not get to die as a martyr in his own mind," she continued. "He does not get to make me carry that," and she swallowed, throat aching. "We leave him alive," she finished. "We let the cold and his own poison do the rest," and she looked at Jed one last time. "He can live with himself," she said. "That is punishment enough." Silas held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slow and heavy. He turned away from Jed like turning away was the hardest thing he had done in years. He grabbed the bucket and stomped out the remaining flames. Smoke thinned. The cabin breathed again. Eliza stood still, listening to the wind outside, listening to Jed's weak coughing in the snow, listening to her own heart slow. Then a sound came from the porch. A single footstep. Not running, not fleeing, coming closer. Silas's head snapped up. He lifted the pistol and moved to the door, silent as shadow. Eliza grabbed the rifle from the floor, hands finding the grip like they belonged there now. The step outside paused. Then a knock, slow and careful, like whoever stood there did not want to spook a wounded animal. Silas held his breath and opened the door a crack, pistol ready. A man stood on the porch alone, hat in his hands, eyes wide with fear and guilt. Sheriff Madsen. Elk Hollow's sheriff who had never once stepped into Jed's shack when Eliza screamed. His gaze dropped to the blood and ash inside, to Jed on the floor, to Eliza standing with a rifle. His mouth went dry. "I heard shots," he said. Eliza stared at him. Words rose in her chest like fire. "Where were you before? Where were you when I was bleeding? Where were you when he called me his?" She did not speak those words. She did not need to. Sheriff Madsen swallowed and looked at Silas. "This is going to bring trouble," he whispered. Bigger trouble, and Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. Trouble had found them already. Now it was only changing shape. Sheriff Madsen stood on the porch like a man who had walked into the wrong story and could not find his way back out. Snow clung to his hat brim. His cheeks were raw from cold. He kept staring past Silas into the cabin, seeing the burned floor, the broken table, the blood on the wall. His eyes found Jed on the boards, breathing thin and ugly. Then his eyes found Eliza with the rifle in her hands. Something in his face tightened, like shame finally got through his thick skull. Silas kept the pistol low but ready. "Say what you came to say," he told the sheriff, voice quiet as frost. Madsen swallowed and looked at Eliza again. "Half the men I sent up the trail ran back to town," he said. "They said you shot one, and Silas broke another. and his voice shook on Silas's name. "They are yelling in the saloon right now," he added. "Some are saying kidnapping. Some are saying murder. Some are saying you set fire to your own cabin to trap them." And the last lie made Eliza's jaw clench. Eliza stepped closer to the doorway so the sheriff could not avoid her face. "You know what happened," she said. Her throat still burned, but her words came out steady. "You always knew what happened." And the truth sat between them like a stone. Madsen's eyes darted to Jed on the floor. "Jed will claim he was attacked in his own home," he muttered. "He will say you were taken and corrupted." And Eliza felt sick at the word corrupted, because it sounded like a preacher's excuse for cruelty. The sheriff rubbed his mouth with a gloved hand. "And Silas Crowe," he said, voice lower, "your name is not clean in places east of here." And Silas's eyes went flat. "There are men who will ride hard if they hear you are here," Madsen warned. Silas did not deny it. He only asked, "What do you want?" Madsen hesitated. "I want this to end, without more blood," he said. Then he looked straight at Eliza, and his voice softened in a way that made her angrier. "Girl, if you stay here, they will come again," he added. "Not drunks. Men with badges, men who do not care why you ran." And he lowered his gaze like he could not stand the weight of what he had allowed. Eliza felt Silas shift beside her like he wanted to pull her back from the doorway. She did not move. "So what is it?" she asked the sheriff. "You here to take us? Or you here to finally do one good thing?" And the question cut sharp. Madsen's shoulders dropped. "I cannot stop the papers," he admitted. "I cannot stop the talking in town." And his eyes flicked to Jed again. "But I can buy you time," he said. "If you leave before dawn, I can say I found Jed alone and drunk and hurt from his own mess." And Eliza stared at him, not sure if she believed his sudden courage. The sheriff added, "I can say the men fired first and fled. I can say I never saw the girl." And he said girl like it was a kindness, not a habit. Silas spoke, slow and careful. "Why?" he asked. Madsen looked away, and when he spoke, his voice sounded tired. "Because I have a daughter in Cheyenne," he said, "and I keep seeing her face when I look at Eliza." And that confession made Eliza's stomach twist, because it did not erase what he had done, but it sounded like the first honest thing he had ever said. He cleared his throat. "There is a judge in Redgate," he continued. "Judge Hollis. He is stubborn. He is fair when it costs him." And Silas's eyes sharpened at the name. Eliza felt the room tilt. She remembered Silas's metal box, the letters, the plan for if he died. She looked at Silas and saw it in his face. He had already thought about Redgate. He had already prepared for a road that did not end on this mountain. Silas shut the door and barred it again. The cabin went quiet except for Jed's weak coughing and the wind rubbing the logs. Eliza set the rifle on the table with careful hands. Her fingers were still shaking, but now the shake belonged to choice, not fear. She faced Silas. "We are leaving," she said. Silas watched her for a long beat. "You are sure?" he asked. Eliza swallowed. The fire popped. The smell of smoke still clung to the walls. "If we stay, he keeps reaching," she said, nodding toward Jed. "If we go, he has to chase what he cannot catch," and she hated how much she understood her father's hunger for control. Silas's jaw tightened. "He will chase anyway," he said. Eliza stepped closer until she could see the cut on Silas's cheek. The blood dried dark against his skin. "Then we stop letting him decide where our lives happen," she replied, and the words came from somewhere deeper than anger. She saw something soften in Silas's eyes, like her courage touched a place in him that had been dead a long time. Silas moved to the corner and grabbed the saddlebags. He packed fast and quiet, not wasting motion. Eliza did the same, wrapping bread, dried meat, matches, a small tin of coffee. She found herself packing like she had always known how to run. She hated that skill. She also needed it. Silas opened the metal box and placed the oilcloth-wrapped papers inside the bag, then hesitated, fingers lingering like he was holding the past by its throat. Eliza watched him. "What is in those papers?" she asked. Silas looked up. The firelight caught the exhaustion under his eyes. "Proof," he said, "of what Jed did to my father." And his voice went hard. "Proof of things I did not do," he added softer, and Eliza understood without being told. A man like Silas did not end up living alone on a mountain for no reason. He carried something heavier than grief. He carried a story that could hang him if the wrong man spoke it first. Eliza nodded once. "Then we go to the judge," she said. Silas's breath hitched, like the idea scared him more than gunfire. "Redgate is not kind," he warned. "A courtroom is not a cabin. Men will look at you and see a girl with bruises and think you are weak." And Eliza felt heat rise in her chest. "Let them," she said. "I lived under my father's fist for 19 years." And she stared at Silas until he could not look away. "I can survive words," she finished, "but I will not survive being dragged back." And her throat tightened on the last part. Silas reached out and touched her shoulder, careful where the bruises hid under cloth. "Then we do it your way," he said. They waited for full dark. Silas dragged Jed by the collar to the porch and left him slumped against the railing, alive but broken, where the cold would bite him until fear sobered him. Jed's eyes fluttered open once. He saw Eliza standing in the doorway, and his mouth worked like he wanted to speak. Eliza did not step forward. She did not offer a blanket. She did not spit. She simply held his gaze until he looked away first. That small surrender felt larger than any punch. Just before dawn, the wind eased. The world outside looked clean and cruel. Snow glittered under pale light. The mountains stood still like they were watching. Silas saddled the horse, hands moving fast. Eliza climbed up without help, and she felt something in her spine straighten. Silas swung up behind her and gathered the reins. He paused for one quiet beat, not moving, as if he was listening for the past to follow. A faint sound drifted up the trail. Hooves, far away. Eliza's breath caught. Silas's shoulders tightened. Then the sound faded, swallowed by distance. Either it was nothing, or it was everything coming late. Silas leaned close to her ear. "Hold on," he said. Eliza did not cling to him like a frightened girl. She steadied herself like a rider. The horse stepped forward, and the cabin fell behind them, a dark shape in a white world. The smoke from the chimney thinned in the cold air, then vanished. Eliza kept waiting for her chest to hurt with leaving. What she felt instead was a slow, steady lightness, like her lungs finally had room. After an hour on the trail, Silas pulled the horse to a stop beneath a stand of pines. He slid down and helped Eliza down, not because she needed it, but because his hands wanted to. He turned his face away from the wind and studied her. "You can still turn back," he said, and Eliza nearly laughed. She stepped closer until the space between them was warm. "There is nothing back there that is mine," she answered. Silas's jaw worked, like the words hit him somewhere old. "You do not know what you are choosing with me," he said. "You do not know what I have done, what men might say I did." And the fear in his voice was not for himself alone. It was fear of being poisoned in her new life. Eliza lifted her hand and touched the cut on his cheek with her fingertips, gentle as a whisper. Silas flinched at first, then went still. "I know what you did for me," she said. "I know what you did not do to me," and her voice stayed calm. She held his gaze. "The rest we faced together," she finished, and it was not romance. It was a vow. Silas's eyes shone with something that looked like grief turning into relief. He did not grab her. He did not take. He leaned in slow, giving her the chance to step away, and when his lips met hers it was soft, careful, like he was afraid to break what they had just built. Eliza kissed him back, not because she owed him, but because she chose him. The kiss ended, and the world was still. The wind moved through pine needles. Somewhere a bird called once, sharp and lonely. Silas rested his forehead against hers for a silent beat. "I thought the mountain would be my grave," he whispered. Eliza breathed in his scent, smoke and pine and cold leather. "It was my grave too," she said. We just climbed out," and the words made Silas's hands tremble as they settled at her waist, steadying, not claiming. They climbed back onto the horse and rode east. As the sun rose, it painted the snow in pale gold. Eliza looked ahead and did not see a clear future. She saw danger. She saw men who would not believe her. She saw a courtroom where Jed might shout lies and call them truth. She saw the possibility of losing Silas to a rope or a cell. She saw it all, and for the first time she did not fold under it. She sat taller in the saddle. Behind her, the mountain stayed silent, not forgiving, not forgetting. Just watching them go. And Eliza finally understood what freedom felt like. It did not feel like peace.